Hey there, this is Owen with GrimmSpeed, and I'm going to be walking you through how to install the GrimmSpeed Aluminum Turbo Inlet for the 2015 to 21 WRX. We are showing this installation on our 2020 WRX. Keep in mind that if you have a 2015 or 2016 model, some connections will look a little different, but I will mention those as we go. Before we get started, take a look at this list of tools you will need and make sure you have everything ready to go. To get started, safely lift the car and remove the factory plastic under tray. You will also want to uninstall the metal skid pan by removing these four 12mm bolts. Next, you will want to remove the intake from the turbo inlet. If you are running a factory intake, it is as simple as loosening the hose clamp between the intake tube and the inlet and removing the nut that mounts the intake pipe to the frame rail. Uncouple the intake pipe from the inlet and move it aside. If you have an aftermarket intake, it is recommended that you unplug the MAF wiring harness and remove the entire intake assembly to ensure that you have ample room to work. Next, remove the two 10mm bolts mounting the factory turbo inlet to the face of your turbo. Set these bolts aside as we will be reusing them later. There are several lines that will need to be removed in order for the inlet to come out smoothly. Start by unplugging the vacuum lines running from your boost control solenoid to the face of the turbo and the wastegate actuator. Now is also a good time to unplug the wiring harness running to your boost control solenoid. The next line to be removed is the line running from the evaporative system purge solenoid. I recommend using a pair of hose pliers for this to avoid damaging the line. You can also use those same pliers to remove the vacuum reference line running to your bypass valve. Next, we will be removing the return line from the PCV system. Press the connector on the gray plug and gently pull upwards on the hose to release the assembly from the inlet. You will then want to press that same tab to unplug the gray connector from the white housing. For 2015 and 16 model cars, this connection is just a hose connected to a barb on the inlet, so you can just use a pair of pliers to release the clamp and gently pull upwards to remove the hose. The final step to remove the factory inlet is to loosen the clamp securing the bypass valve to the charge pipe. You should then be able to remove the whole inlet assembly from the vehicle. Now that we have the factory inlet on the bench, we can start stripping it down by removing the bypass valve. Simply move this clamp out of the way with your pliers and wiggle the bypass valve free. The other component that we will need to remove from the factory inlet is the boost control solenoid. Simply loosen the two Phillips head screws mounting it in place and you should be able to wiggle the solenoid free. We now have everything removed from the factory inlet, so you can gently set it aside and grab your new GrimmSpeed replacement. We will start by installing the boost control solenoid on the new inlet. You may want to put a drop of oil on the O-ring to allow it to seat smoothly without tearing. Secure the solenoid in place using the included 3mm Allen bolts. The next step is to install the included bypass valve coupler onto the inlet. Seat the coupler in place on the inlet and drop both of the included worm gear clamps over top. Finally, slide the bypass valve into the coupler and make sure you have it oriented as we show here. Tighten down both of the worm clamps until they are snug and you can just see the bead through the silicone. Keep in mind that you may need to trim the bypass valve coupler shorter depending on your charge pipe and bypass valve configuration. You can check the fitment by loosely assembling the inlet and bypass valve and making sure they both line up in the car. If you do need to trim the coupler, we find that a fresh razor blade and a little bit of soapy water as lubricant yields the best results. You are now ready to install your GrimmSpeed Turbo Inlet into the car. Start by seating the bypass valve back into the charge pipe, leaving the clamp loose so that the inlet can be aligned. Using the 2 bolts we removed earlier, secure the inlet to the face of the turbo. Once the inlet is securely mounted in place, tighten up the clamp holding the bypass valve to the charge pipe. It is now just a matter of plugging all the hoses and connectors back in. Start with a vacuum reference line for the bypass valve. Next, you can plug the lines for your boost control solenoid back into their places on the wastegate actuator and turbo compressor housing. Follow this up by reconnecting your boost control solenoid to the car's wiring harness. These next couple steps apply only to 2017 and up WRX owners. Start by inserting the small metal tab we've included into the gray PCV plug. Next, slide the white PCV connector into place on the inlet, aligning the plug just above the threaded hole as shown. Plug the gray connector back into the PCV hose and secure it in place using the included 2.5mm Allen bolt. If you have a 2015 or 16 WRX, you can simply slide your PCV hose over the port on the GrimmSpeed inlet and secure it in place with the factory pinch clamp. The last hose we have to hook up is the line for the evap purge solenoid. You can simply slide this over the nipple on the inlet. That's it! Your new GrimmSpeed Turbo Inlet is installed. Reattach your intake piping to the inlet and bolt the skid plate and splash guards back into place, and go for a drive. If you have any questions about the install procedure, feel free to reach out to our team of Subaru experts at support@grimmspeed.com.